The dark forests of Norway hold not just the stories of gods and giants fighting. There is a much scarier story that it holds. The ghost of the old Englishman with an axe who seemed to impose a wretched curse over people who dare to cross the forest. The people were not very kind to the man when he was living, and that is why the curse today was more haunting to them than they could have thought. And it seemed as if it was out for the blood of every villager that ever lived. And now, after 70 years, it is still out there, waiting to hunt down, but he doesn't know who to hunt. Alsuk was interrupted in the middle of the story, and people were bored of their mind. And then it was Privis's turn to tell a story, so he stood up and ignored and walked away. Then a bit later, he came back with a guitar and threw it in the fire. They all thought it was very weird, but then Privis continued in his uneven Scottish accent. To tell my story, I have to first sacrifice a material I love. This guitar is something that I love. The story that you're about to listen isn't just an ordinary story, and in case you wish to tell it forward, you must first sacrifice a material you love, or the consequences would be terrible. At first, people laughed off, and then Privis went on to tell the story. And as he was telling the story, there was a cold chill running over spine of people sitting, holding their legs, trying to warm themselves as the fire was slowly going out. The same story that Privis told was later on told by Alsuk, but in his arrogance, he denied the sacrifice, calling it an extra touch to spice up the story. A week later, Alsuk was found dead in the forest. Nobody knew why it happened or who did it, but everyone present there on the night of the first story was skeptical and suspected it to be a murder. Then one of the other friends decided to do the story without the sacrifice again, and then he was met with the same fate as Olsen. Nobody knew what happened and why it happened, but there was Privis that get on to the closest to all of it. He said it all started one time at the camp college, when he first time listened to the story and decided to tell the same story the next night. He did it without the sacrifice, and then, a few days later, he started seeing visions of beautiful women, and they would call her into the forests. Their beauty was too powerful to be ignored, and he went on to follow them. And then, when they would enter the forest, those beautiful women who looked like glowing butterflies would seduce the storyteller, and anyone who caved in would be killed. The only reason Privis survived was because they couldn't seduce him, since he was into men. Being gay saved Privis. So I decided to give the story a try, and that is why I am telling this next story without making a sacrifice of a personal item. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. What should I tell you about the forests of Mexico? Haunted by the most fearsome witches and apparitions, these forests are a living nightmare. And every time we want to go to the city, we have to pass along through these nightmares. So to safely go to the city, we mostly start our travel very early in the morning so as to reach the city before the dark nights hit, as the forest is a miserable place during the day itself. This particular evening, me and my abuelita decided to head out to the forest earlier than usual. It wasn't particularly night neither, it was morning, but the dangling time between that. And I picked up the bindle and we started our journey toward the city. And we talked a lot on the way to make the way look shorter. The city must have been 6 to 7 hours away, and yet we embarked on foot. Our ancestors might have been closely related to Tarahumara runners. My abuelita was around 55 when this happened, so she was quite in shape to make such a strenuous journey. She was 72 when she made such the last journey, and the times haven't really improved since then too. I was 5 when we went on that journey through the dark forest, and good thing was that I was too oblivious to what had happened. I was on the epicenter of the scariest moment of my life, and had no idea of it until I was old enough to understand what had happened. So we started our journey, and we reached the first village exit in an hour. Abuelita was quite certain that we would make the journey on time. We were accompanied by the Villeros family for about an hour, and then up until the forest's eldest son of Elpo Jose Rodriguez was with us, to get some woods back at home. By 2 o'clock noon, we were in the forest and had enough time to spare for some rest and reached the city. We were even ahead of time. I decided to take a short route instead. Now that we were ahead of time, we decided to do that, and my abuelita, she said that she will not take the short route and instead will go as usual, and she told me to walk straight and don't mess up. Me being me, I decided to go for the short route. I soon found myself lost and confused as the two diverted routes looked very similar, and I could barely understand which way I needed to go in order to meet abuelita. I was pretty sure that she was probably worried sick about now, and then I kept walking, taking turns through the dark forest and looking for the right turn to take. And as I walked, I saw someone coming up close, and it was a woman. And before I could ask her, she came and asked me, "Have you seen my kids? They were 2 of them. They were last seen by the river." I was a bit suspicious, and I just shook my head and without words told her that I have not, and just kept walking. And as I walked away and went to distance, I could hear her wailing sounds from distance. And as I walked further, I saw one more figure approaching me. And as he came closer, I saw it was a man dressed in the U.S. Army attire, and it was Senor Blanco. And I looked at his fingers, and they were chopped off. So I just walked away, realizing that these are all the ghosts from the folklores that we heard as a kid. And it seemed as if the whole forest was filled with them as they started approaching me. I kept walking without turning back. It was getting dark, and it must have been at least 3 hours since I took the short route, and I was worried about abuelita more than I was for me. And I kept silently tearing up. And the biggest blunder I did was to stop and look behind me. As I looked behind, I saw all the apparitions were following me. I was more white than Senor Blanco, white of fear, as La Llorona kept wailing and approaching me, calling me her son. I slowly started walking away, and then picked up the pace to get the distance in. It was dark, and I was running blind with no sense of direction. I just decided to run up straight, scared, tearing, and calling out for abuelita. And soon, an hour later, I found a bush that I ran across. And soon there was light, and it was almost as if it was daytime. And then just ran past it, and saw that abuelita was walking, and she looked back at me, and said, "What use is a shortcut if it takes the same time?" I was confused and out of breath and seemed completely deranged. I've been running for more than 4 hours in that jungle. And as I got out, it turned out that all I was doing was running for mere 9 minutes. We did make it out of the forest in time. But things did change for me that day, for what I experienced was something paranormal. Later during her last days, my abuelita did confirm the haunting of the forests. This experience took place 4 years ago, after my time at the all-boys school, and I was back in Boston. I was 20 years old, and I was gearing up to go off to college in another state. Before I left, I made it a priority to spend as much time with my friends before our respective journeys into college life tripped us apart, and they always tend to. A friend of mine invited all of us high school friends to a bonfire in the Leominster, Massachusetts. For those of you who have never been to Leominster, it is basically the countryside of Massachusetts, where farming life and skiing resorts are plentiful. My friend, we will call him Chase, family owned a plot of land out there in the countryside that has been in his family since the early 1920s. I was excited to go because I used to live out there when I was very young, about 5 years old, and haven't been out there since then. A few other friends, we will call Kendrick, Sophie, Talia, and Kane, decided to carpool up there. Since Talia and her mom own a minivan that she scored for us to travel in for that weekend, about 15 minutes away from our location, Kane asked Talia to pull over in a liquor store to buy some drinks. Keep in mind, some of us were only 18 to 20 years old, but Kane just turned 21, so obviously we stayed in the car well. He went in to get the drinks. My excitement went up another level as up until this point. I never had alcohol before, and this will be the first time after Kane returned with drinks. Talia drove us the rest of the way to Chase's place. When we arrived there, it was just about sunset, and Chase was standing outside waiting for us with his arms extended, and that gesture of what took you so long to hit parked, and we poured out of the van. His cane showed up, chased the alcohol, and Chase's frustration quickly shifted to a smile, as if all things were forgiven. Chase ushered us to the back of the home, saying that we had already started barbecuing and food was practically done and getting cold. Later, as it was dark outside now, and my friends now were sitting around this bonfire, which was stacked with broken pieces of the family barn that was located a few yards from the actual house, with hay used as kindling, laughing and carrying on about high school memories. I was on my second beer at this point, drinking slowly as I didn't want to get drunk, as this was my first time drinking and I was afraid I'd pass out and miss the festivities. But I did have to pee. I announced I was going to take a leak. Chase reminded me to turn on the generator before heading in, so you can turn on the lights since this place lacked electricity for some reason. I assured him that I would as I stood up, but a sudden head rush overtook me. I was buzzes. I stumbled back. Kane laughed and called me a lightweight, and the rest of my friends laughed. I gave Kane the finger as I turned and started toward the house. Where it is I was in the middle of the bonfire in the house, I felt compelled to look over at the dark barn. I don't know why, but I did. And I studied it for a moment. And just as my eyes were completing its scan of the barn, my eyes instantly were fixed and my jaw dropped. His panic took over me. Through the orange glow of the bonfire, illuminated the barn partially. Standing in the doorway of the barn, there was something standing there, staring at my friends, like this person was just glaring at them. At first, I thought it was one of my friends over at the barn, just wanted to check it out. So I looked back at my friends to see which one of them guys was over there. But all 5 friends were standing around the fire having good time. My eyes widened at this point, and I looked back over at the barn. And just when I did, the person who was once glaring at my friends was now glaring dead at me. He noticed I spotted him. I stood still in panic and shock because there was an intruder on my friend's property, and I needed to inform the others so we can run and get to safety and phone the police. And I felt goosebumps radiating through my body as it did before a long time ago, forced me to remember the silhouetted man from my school 4 years ago. This prompted me to fully study this intruder in case I needed to give a description to the police later. But when I did, I noticed the man was standing there, but his lower half was faded due to the glow of the bonfire, and his solid state was visible in the shadows. It was then that I realized what I was seeing. I mentally tried to calm myself as I fixed my eyes on this ghost who had not broken his glare at me. I muscled up the courage somehow to glare right back at him. I was now locked in a stare down with this figure for what seemed like minutes, but it was more like a few seconds. Just then I heard Sophia, "Hey, did you pee yourself or something?" Her words pierced my ears as I heard my friends laughing and asking why I was just standing there, but my eyes never broke from this figure. Just then, I felt this sudden burst of anger take over me like a fiery wave. As I was flung into the inferno of a bonfire, I felt sweat beating down my cheeks as I glared at this ghost who was glaring back at me. Just then, the ghost sort of smirked at me, as if he was taunting me. This enraged me further, as I could hear footsteps approaching from behind me. It was Kendrick coming to check up on me. As I heard him say, "Dude, what's up?" Just as Kendrick asked that, I bolted. I charged towards the ghost as if we were about to go to war, and the ghost stood for a few seconds, never breaking his glare on me. I felt my heart beating against my chest as each step I took. I became hotter and hotter. I felt like I was a man on fire. As soon as I was a yard or two away from this ghost, he steps into the barn out of sight. "Get back here," I remembered shouting. I got to the barn doorway where the ghost stood and flung the door open and stood there expecting to see him waiting for me. But nothing. I was staring into pure darkness of the barn. I remember my heart beating hard against my chest. My sweat-drenched shirt clung to my body. Heavy breathing, ready to adrenaline coursing through my body as I was ready for a fight that would never come. The next thing I knew, Kendrick, Kane, and Chase ran up to me and grabbed my arm, knocking me out of my daze. My body instantly felt normal, so I no longer felt like I was on fire. Completely confused, I didn't know what came over me. I never felt such anger before, as I am known for my buds as being a very chill guy, but I was truly ready to rip this ghost guy's head off of his body, or lack thereof. My friends figured out that I must have been drunk or high or something to rationalize why I acted like that. They began escorting me back towards our bonfire, where Sophia and Talia was sitting looking at me with concerned eyes. Still trying to rationalize what I've just done as my friends guided me away, I turned my head to look at the barn's door, which was still wide open once more. And I kid you not, deep into the dark barn, I saw him. More specifically, I saw his floating head as his eyes were staring straight at me with a devilish grin. Nobody, just his head. I turned in face front words as we neared the bonfire, and my friends began to calm me down. Sophie spoke up and asked what happened. I remembered saying nothing, as I didn't want to appear crazier than I just made myself out to be. I had to go take a leak, but I figured that I would just hold it until we went back inside together to prevent myself from acting out like that again. We did eventually return back into the house. I took my leak and ended up passing out on the couch. As far-fetched as the story might sound, trust me, I know it does, but it really happened to me. The fact that I was ready to go to blows with a spirit, absolutely insane. Kane eventually confessed to me a few months ago. Yeah, we do keep in touch that I must have taken his LSD blended drink as we were drinking the same brand of bottled beer, and we were just putting it down randomly and picking up on what we thought was our own beer. We knew that must have been the case, because he didn't feel like the effects of the drink that entire night. But when he saw me act like that, he figured that was the reason why. I honestly don't know if I was drunk or tripping off my friend's LSD, but I truly felt that there was a ghost in that barn taunting me. Angry that Chase took pieces of his barn to burn in our bonfire. That was his way of getting back at us. That was my assumption, of course. I have a few more encounters that I would like to share in time, but this one still gets to me.